It's 1762. Thomas Shepherd, and now that I've looked at his will, all his children, there's nary a single mention of a slave being willed. I think, yet again, he might have had a Quaker temperament at least. To have 8 kids and all that wealth and no slaves, that says something. Now, I mean, in the will. But he founds Mecklenburg in 1762 officially in colonial laws. And, you know, we can talk about Romney, but we don't want to. And he sets up all these lots that are 106 by 200, 103 by 206 feet long, rectangular. If you go to the corner of Mill and High, Beth Montgomery lives in a little house right here on the southeast corner. Nancy Andrews had described the first houses, and it was exactly what she said is a typical first house, other than the ones that are on the main street. And it's a lot of stone, with an entrance in the stone, steps up to an upper porch. You've seen this up and down Sharpsburg. It's like this, and she said this was the first style. So you got a great example. And without elaborating, we have more to do. If there's ever a structure in Shepherdstown that could be said that George Washington slept there, and my sources are in the Shepherdstown Register, and then confirming other angles of the story. That is the house, because it was a tavern. And the man he came to see was to thank Michael Cookus, who lived across the street and owned all those buildings. He came to see him because George's much loved cousin, Warner Washington, told him, Michael Cookus saved my life once. And you put the pieces together, it just, he stays in. Why did he come to thank Michael Cookus? So again, that's not what we're here to talk about, but I couldn't resist. So in 1762, we are now in Mecklenburg, which is a brilliant political savvy move because Charlotte is German, and you want all the German craftsmen to come to you. But she's the wife of George III. So you're covering all your bases. And what we learned last time, and you built a big stone fort, by the way, where McMurray is. And anybody can look at those massive stones around it, and it doesn't take much thinking to think those were the stones that were the fort. And my sources, it was either Dansky or three sources, they said it was a stone fort. So he offered a system of defense against the Shawnee, where, as we said, you go out, parties of 2 guys were hunting, a party of 2 guys were scouting, and you sound an alarm, so everybody rush into the fort. So it's the summer of 1775, and the Continental Congress says, we've been told we have to provide, Virginia needs to provide 2 companies of roughly 100 men each to join this thing, tentatively called the Continental Army, working title. And they got to go to Jamie's old address. They have to go to Cambridge and meet
Prospect Hill, the fort on Prospect Hill.
That's right. There you go. Well, George and Adam did not need a second to decide where to go find these perfect candidates. The Tidewater guys weren't going anywhere. They weren't fighters. They also had to manage their huge slave industrial complex properties. I looked at the numbers. Very, very few people had slaves. And I think it's all the German thing was just have a big family. It's so obvious. Just have lots of kids. Okay, but we're focusing on an early period. Continuing. George and Adam are going, where are we going to look? They probably both started laughing out loud because it says, hey, those guys that were on Shepherdstown and their families have been fighting the Shawnee like a military regiment for 40 years. They're structured like a military organization with a fort and these scout things. Everybody's disciplined. Everybody's becoming very skilled, unfortunately, having to fight. They have basically been proving out since, since as early as 1715 or so. And of course, the men who were the right age were probably born all around 1740. Have I even mentioned that George has already known them because he went on expeditions west, one of course being Fort Duquesne, with these very same guys. It's all a done deal. And I can just see George going, oh, I know where the people are. And, so one comment about George, nobody shaped this county more than, if there's one person, than him. This is a side comment, we're gonna stay with our topic. Why? The main reason is that he had the arsenal built, or the arm. I always get it mixed up. Well, he had the arsenal, the one on the Potomac side built in Harper's Ferry, which caused a whole other number of trends. But when the Civil War came, that brought John Brown here, it brought the B&O came through here. It became enormously important strategically because of George deciding to put it there, and then the B&O coming through. Side comment. Who was George? Gotta just say it real quickly. He's a Stoic. Read like Marcus Aurelius. That explains so much. He is a Stoic. Quite unlike Thomas Jefferson, I should say. And another one, he's an enlightened person. Cromwell's guys took their property. That's why they came here. And he didn't become a party guy or anything like that. He was very serious. His father died. He was a teenager. He had to run everything. And he kind of grew himself. He and Lincoln are lifelong learners. That's one of the key things you'll notice. Okay, all that aside, huge, massive side comment. Okay, word goes out to Frederick, Winchester, and here, the two villages at all in this region, where all those, now, be very careful. I talked to Ben Bankster, the Irish professor here. Scots-Irish. Scots-Irish. Don't do Scotch-Irish. Scots-Irish. And if you want to just, finesse it, backcountry. All that. And I think the men, word came out where China Kitchen was the Sheets gunsmith shop, along with another building that kind of ran up King Street with the churches. That's all was Sheets property, and they made the Kentucky rifles. That is one reason why they started collecting here. And I think the place they drilled was what was considered the yard of the Great Western Hotel. The Great Western Hotel was 2 doors up. It's a house now from the Episcopal Church. But where the Episcopal Church was an open field. It was where the circuses would come later on, and I think that is where the drills went on. And they had to provide their own firearm, their own ammunition, all their clothing, and needed 100 guys. 2 weeks, they had them. And it's a fascinating thing that the head guy, the key guys in their houses are going to leave their families for an undisclosed amount of time. This must be an intensely interdependent community, that they were probably so used to helping each other that they always, what's that line? We got you covered. That's the only thing that would explain it. So many guys, and let's get it right out front. Over the Revolutionary War, according to Dansky Dandridge, and of course she had 2 great uncles who were in the Beeline March. At least one. 300 soldiers were mustered in over all the war in Shepherdstown. She said 1,000. Notice what a good source she is. She's related directly to, the guy who wrote the diary of the language. 100 were true Shepherdstown residents. 100. And 1/3 of them never came back. And what really knocked me out is you had just about the exact number of that 35, 36 who are confirmed Revolutionary War veterans who did come home because they're in our 4 cemeteries that were in existence then. Wow. Okay, so George goes up to Cambridge, and I always like saying this, we've all had an idea, like at work or something, we thought we'd just blow everybody away, and you're gonna be carried away on He's sitting there wondering, you send out a request and you hope for replies, and he's sitting there going, will my buddies come? He'd never go more than 50 miles anywhere. Will my buddies come? What the hell is Massachusetts? And that's valid. So, a tremendous moment. Alexander Butler wrote about it in a little book called My Ride to the Barbecue. And one of the men, Henry Bettinger, who got the diary, told him this is what happened. Here's George. And then, on the border, come the ugliest, beat up looking men you ever saw, but they're all ramrod straight, and muscular and all that, in a good mood, always in a good mood. And what I mean is no mirror out west of the ridge, They came. Remember that bond? We have no idea what bonds are anymore. And what is so touching, you'll find out that George Washington, he loved the ladies, he always kept a count of the women he danced each ball, such a guy, But nothing will make him have tears like this every time is when he sees sacrifice and courage. Just bam. And, you gotta like him for that. He rode over, tossed his reins to Billy Lee, and instead of with this, he with each hand, Fraley, Tab, Shepherd, Morgan, so good to see you. And he had manly tears coming down his face. Because now, as I've often said, you've heard this too, that weren't the thing itself. We were just talking. And now we really might have a country. So the bond is incredible. Okay, so the whole thing starts. And we always see George as this marble man, like this boring looking guy, just sitting there with no emotion. If you ever meet Walter Washington, he has the same lack of emotional animation, but it's natural. Old man. Not this one. Not this one. You want to know who he was really? I love this. So, just imagine what a cordial meeting it will be when those Scots, Irish, and by the way, the Germans all learned how to fight and carry on too. Now, there's like 6 emperors in the first call. And they happen to have a cordial introduction to Boston's Irish. It's a cordial, no. And you can see it happen right away. Oh yeah? Yeah. 2 months. In this case, it's boiling over. Nothing George feared more or hated most with mob accuracies. He comes galloping in, again, tosses the reins to Billy Lee, makes his way right to the middle of this ready to explode thing. He grabs both the guys by the nape of the neck and goes, ah! Just keep that image. That is George Washington. And then all dismissed. So the war begins, as you probably know. Most of the people here, particularly under Hugh Stevenson's command, were captured at Fort Washington, Fort Lee, Fort Washington, Battle. That was one of the first ones. They were, a lot of them were captured. And a lot of them were imprisoned in ungodly conditions. And George had captured. He treated them properly. You know, the officers better than the, privates. He gave them the, care, gave them room, gave them food, following the conventions. And there came a moment, those of you who've heard of it, it's worth repeating anyway. The Beddingers, we've mentioned the Beddingers a million times. Henry Beddinger, great uncle of Dansky Dandridge, who wrote about it. Other one is George Michael Beddinger. And then the third one is Dan. Dan was like a teenager still. When the two older brothers headed out, Dan, you gotta stay home with mom. Someone's gotta take care of the place. You have to stay. Well, that doesn't work, right? So he manages to skitter out anyway and find his way, because he was actually a real lawyer. He's just, a scrapper. He's a scrapper. And he is captured. And sure enough, he is in Lower Manhattan, a prisoner. And a guy named Cunningham was in charge of distributing food for the prisoners, which he was actually keeping and selling on the black market while they starved. Cunningham was sentenced to hang in England, and on the gallows he said, I killed 1,100 some odd men. One of them almost was Daniel. And he was in I think a brewery, one of those kind of things, whiskey, but he was scraping sugar crystals off the vats to survive. Skin and bones. There came an exchange. By this time, the Hessians who were running this thing had all the prisoners on a prisoner ship called the Jersey. And here comes this exchange. And they come on they're supposed to pick the ones they leave behind will die. And they look through everybody, yes, yeah, night, and they look at Daniel and they go, night. Ein Landesmann, bitte, German. Ich bin ein Landesmann. And they, oh, really? Okay, sure, whatever. They take him. And he's carried away, to wherever they are sent. Can you imagine? Remember I talked about George? When he saw, after he took care of all of their guys that they're back away, saw the skin and bones of his guys. This is making George become a great person. His rage was just so intense. My man, it's his heart that made him a great man. Except for slavery, he had to figure that out until he died. But Daniel, Michael's looking for brother Daniel. Henry, hi, Emma, where is my little brother? No one knows. It finally comes down to a place near Philadelphia, or in Jersey, but not far from Philadelphia. And there's a farmhouse, 1,000,001. And you could just see it. This is in Dancy's book about George Michael Beddinger, great uncle. He walks into this dark, shadowy, huge barn, straw, little broken figures of guys in the corners, Yeah. Well, there isn't anybody here that I know. There's one, Michael. Wow. He ain't heavy, he's my brother. He gets a chair, a bunch of leather straps, like this. These skin and bones, And he fashioned this little carriage. The two brothers going back to Shepherdstown and finding these players. Whoa, you stay, please stay. They stayed a little while and recuperated on their trip, with these wonderful, sure. They kind of worked them back to health a little bit. Finally got Henry and Daniel back to Shepherdstown, and Daniel recuperated. They put him on some kind of guard duty thing, which was right, but he didn't stay home. All of this is shaping up to see the bond that's so strong between George and actually very particularly the original bunch. And you have it, but I have to read it aloud. A good many of them were at Valley Forge. A good many of them. I just really worked to find out. William Dark was there. Later became the general. And then there was James Hendricks. He was at Valley Forge. 1 in 6 didn't survive. And again, that thing about George. If you go to Valley Forge, we want our national parks to be nice. We want them to kind of let us go away with a big feeling. George, at that moment, this is when he started thinking like Alexander Hamilton. He said, my men, I'll tell you what he said. He wrote a friend, it wasn't a political letter. The men, why don't they teach this letter in school? To see men without clothes, to cover their nakedness, without blankets to lie on, without shoes, without a house or hut to cover them until they could be built, and submitting without a murmur is a proof of patience and obedience, which in my opinion can scarcely be paralleled. They were making him a great man. This thing, this sacrifice. So now that's where we're going to end the whole thing about the Beeline March. They marched 600 miles in 25 days. Kind of said hello to everybody along the way. We're laughing, and one guy didn't make it, not because he was tired, but because he was bad. He got sent home. And there's also a very interesting moment where they punished somebody who was claiming to be a patriot and wasn't. That it's a whole lot like the kid kettle being used like waterboarding. They were tough back then. So anyway, let's leave it on that thought of George. Why does this bring up Alexander Hamilton? He's waiting while men are, as he described, and their Continental Congress could not get their act together to send them supplies. And he did notice that the British had currency and could go to any proprietor who would gladly give them everything because they had money. And George said, you cannot ever become a great country unless you have banks that can provide you money when you need it. You can tell that's where he started going towards Hamilton. And it's pretty hard to argue with it. Okay. I'll take a few seconds here. Let's talk about this for just a little bit, then I'm going to go right into crazy Rumsey. Any questions? Yes.
Yeah, I'm curious, like the recruitment of these men, like what was the pitch that they were given? Like, what was,
it wasn't very
promised anything?
It was very little promising. No, it was surprising. No, and frankly, veterans not being properly compensated is always a story. After the revolution, veterans stormed Independence Hall because they weren't if they weren't paid. So they were really guaranteed very little, except if you're an officer. George Washington, on another level, selfish level, I want that Shawnee land. No, he was not nice to the Shawnee, and they were not nice. They were unbelievably cruel to people. But all of that was Ohio Valley acres. The officers, depending on rank, are gonna get that. Adam Stephen came back with 5,000 acres in this area. George got 30,000 in up there. So the officers got paid with land, and they others too.
So what was the motivation for the privates? Did they fear that the tyranny by the British? They
Oh,
didn't have a
yes.
connection to the British anymore?
Tons of hatred, still. And frankly, you're not going to see anything that looks anything like it. You know, there were some promised pensions, but and I'll have to look at it again, but it was really, that's what we do. You know, that's a Shepherdstown matter, that's what we do. We fought Shawnee for 40 years, we know that if we don't, we die. So they were like a military regiment, anyway.
Where did the other 100 come from?
Pardon me?
Where did the other 100 get here? Where did the other 100 come from?
Remember, the only other town of any size is Winchester. Maryland had to find 2 regiments of their own, so Sharpsburg was not providing any volunteers. Frederick, none of them. They were all going into the Maryland volunteer quota. So they just probably farmers from the immediate area.
Wasn't the large part of the population of the state at that point up here? Or was it many?
No. Well, what was basically was that you're going to slowly get to really dislike the Tidewater people because they were a tiny minority and they had all the power.
Right.
And that's when the separation of church and state became that's a whole story in itself. It was first nation anywhere that separated church from state. Profound. It's Madison and Jefferson, MECKLENBURG, George Mason. And so I guess I'm going to get this right. This is all from 1750 to 1775. All of this, we didn't have any arguments up here because everybody was against church. Everyone, to the man, were all dissenters. They came here as dissenters. They've been taxed Anglican church taxes in Scotland, in Ireland. So, but what's the point of all this? How ironic. When they needed soldiers, they were all dissenters, and the only way you're going to get them to go was to drop all the fines and the penalties they were imposing, the Virginia colony, on them about church reasons. They dropped all of the persecutorial things so they would, it was great, And of course, after the revolution, the whole nation, church and state just dissolved. But I love the fact that they needed them, so they did whatever they wanted.
Were there particular characters who kind of recruited and built that force of 100 men in Shepherdstown? Like, do we know the key people who really rallied the troops here?
There's a book by Millard Bouchon, The History of Jefferson County, only really scholarly book. And in the back, he has all the names of all the guys in the various companies. William Morgan's company was the one that was at Valley Forge. But there was the first one, the Stevenson, but all the names are there. And my guess is if you just look at the officers, those are the people. Okay. I guess we gotta give Jim a little bit of time. I have a feeling some people read all that technical stuff about Rumsey and he'll get out of here. You ready? James Rumsey. It's December 3rd, 1787. All of you have been down at the bottom of Princess Street where the boat ramp is. That's where we are. All of these important people are there to be witnesses, Horatio Gates and INVENTOR and a whole entourage of people to witness a great event. James Rumsey's, and it still stands. No matter how you cut this, it is the first steamboat or a boat driven by jet propulsion to have demonstrated successfully. Barely, but it wasn't a matter of technical flaws. The boat, they got there early, you know, kind of get the coals going, you get the furnace getting the two boiler cooking, all the heat in there. We all know about pipes freezing, don't we? Well, for about 2 nights, there had been some, I found this video, that's one of them. So anyway, they got it going, and it chugged about 1/4 mile, it did the puffing and smoking, and it's pushing forward against the turbine, as promised. And then, of course, these leaks started that they had to staunch with tons of rags. But that's nothing about the, you know, about the quality of the design. It's just stupid ice. They didn't have those electrical things you could wrap around the pipe.
What time of year was this?
This is 1787,
When? During the year?
December 3rd. Oh, no, you had ice on it. You had much different. But anyway, that's what L.M.A. Turner said. But it worked. So, we could jump into all sorts of things here, but the key thing, it worked. And I love this. You gotta think about somebody. Okay, here we go. All of us, there's that wonderful truth that's we live according to expectations that seldom ever really turn out. It happens over and over again. I was on a wagon with a hay. Jerry was pulling the hay, riding the tractor. I'm pulling the square bales out like this, loading them up. And I remember vividly one day, I said, when I was working on the 92nd floor for AT.THERE of the North Tower in New York, I never in a million years knew that I was going to be bailing in West Virginia. That's what I'm talking about. Do you think James Rumsey knew that within 4 years, 4.5 years, his remains will be memorialized in St. Margaret's Chapel in Westminster Abbey, London? Who would ever believe it? While the patent office had some 30 of his ideas enshrined with patents and no survivor to claim them. But he didn't have any idea where he's going to be there. The very next thing he did, one of his big champions, was Ben Franklin. And you know, if Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson really like it, you must have something scientifically. And so he goes straight to Philadelphia. Franklin is the head of the Philosophical Society. He goes, "Here's 200 pounds. There's a letter of introduction. Go to England." You know, and you know why? You know why, Ben? You know why, James? You have to hassle and you have to get a charter from every one of these darn states to get the right to show your vote. It's just a complicated politicking thing. Charter. Go to England, they have patents. And he goes there. Now, just imagine, he says, no, trust me, this is not a country bunker. Now, it's so easy to go city mouse, country mouse, city mouse. The best and the worst thing that ever happened to Rumsey, and this sets us up to England. Nothing is more dangerous than a book. He had an incredible imagination. The moment I got interested in Rumsey was because of our wonderful person, Dan Kokar, who can do anything in the middle, who helped build the half-scale replica. He said this one thing, it stopped me cold. He said, James Rumsey could visualize things in his mind. It was like his own three-dimensional laboratory, as Dan said. And you know, he could think of a widget, and he could make it run forward. It doesn't exist. You make it run backwards, you put it over the side. This is Dan. And after that, I was really interested. The dangerous book, you don't want to ever name your kid Theophilus Desaguliers, if you can avoid it, right? Theophilus Desaguliers, a good Scrabble thing. He wrote a book which very brilliantly popularized and explained Isaac Newton. And Rumsey he's a genius. He got it right away. So if you're a millwright, or you're thinking of propulsion, and you're sitting there going, this many pounds I'm looking at a mill, and if I have this many pounds of water pouring onto the mill wheel, how much of that many pounds are going to make it all the way up to the end? It's an input-output thing. For every action, there is a what? Equal and opposite reaction. And Rumsey, if you're a millwright, suddenly this is like angels descending from the heavens telling you this. Okay, that's him. And this is where that becomes the best and the worst thing for him. He made some people who responded to that very impressive letter from Ben Franklin. Matthew Bolton and that guy, what's his name? James what? The inventor of the steam engine, who made millions, they were the Industrial Revolution in England. And these are heavyweights, no one's more heavyweight than this. They used the steam engine at that point to get water out of mines so they could dig deeper and make more money. Nobody had started thinking about the ocean going or river going until James. And they said, we'd like to meet you. And they knew all about John Fitch, who was a rival, a dubious rival of Rumsey's. I had it explained to me that it really wasn't anything new. But you can just picture Matthew Bolton in Birmingham, Fitch's little claims, and then Rumsey's. You can just see him like pouring himself some grog and lighting the kerosene lamp, just kind of settling in for a night's work, Fish, easy work, nothing there. Then you start reading Rumsey. It's so many ideas. The steamboat boats on the Mississippi River, shallow draft steamboat, that's a Rumsey idea. And then finally he says, Mr. Rumsey, we shall make an offer to you that we shall make to no other. Ownership in our company, just let us make the boats. And this is great, this is great, man. And he had Benjamin Vaughan behind him, who's like his minder, who's like, kind of making sure he's not making a mistake. Benjamin Franklin this is Benjamin Franklin's man. Kind of hovering all the time about Ben. Because Bolton and Watt, all they can do is take your idea and squash it like a bug and you never get them to court. So Rumsey gets to work on it, really positive, yay, but he's also fantastically secretive. Rumsey knew he was obsessive about secret. When Washington wrote his first very laudatory support, he never used the word steam, because Rumsey said, don't ever say the word steam. Now, the thing that everybody was keying in on, it's not steam, but it is one thing, and Dan Tokar said, this is the thing on the boat that really no one doubts he invented and thought of before anyone else. And I know none of you thought you'd ever be interested in a tube boiler. I mean, to the point of ecstasy, or ear ecstasy, some ecstasy. You and I were going to say, this is ridiculous. Of course this is silly. We have, let's say we want to heat up some water. It seems so obvious. And you got a tube, and you have a room full of heat, flames. If I put the flames running through the tube, surrounded by lots of water, how long will it take for that heat to become? How long will it take? How long will it take for that heat inside the tube to make that whole bunch of water steam? That doesn't make a lot of sense. Rumsey said, you put the water coursing through the tube, surrounded by an inferno of heat. Of course, it's going to heat up way faster. And, like radically, what are people thinking? You know what I mean? You thought that all that water would heat up this little tube with its, but that was considered, that was the Watt steam engine. Okay. So what happened is there was a guy named Jacob Haynes, and he was the one skillful enough to make that whole thing that looks like an intestine, this whole grid of a tube boiler, all the vents and everything. And he had it all in this basement, down where Backhorse Ford is, on the property of Mr. John Wysong. No, at that time it wasn't Wysong. But it's very close to the Civil War battlefield, and there was a tavern there, and he had a place in the basement where people were on the steamboat. He's the one that had the skill to make this thing from gun stocks and everything else, all very crude. But you understand the radical, incredible insight that Rumsey had. Obviously, enormously much smaller, didn't have to hold so much water, and really a fraction of the space and 10 times the power. Now, this is where, are you with me? This is getting interesting. Because here he is, the chief criticism, he believed too much in the principles and never worked all the way through the bugs. Now you're getting it. Well, Matthew and Bolton, they knew all about the bugs. Their whole life was getting rid of bugs. Okay, so you can just see this setting up. Rumsey's absolutely determined, absolutely secretive, absolutely suspicious, and had the ideas. And they said, Mr. Rumsey, we're going to give you our best mechanic, Mr. Hadley, and he will work with you. He will be at your side every step of the way. And we will want to report from you. I can smell my own chicken burning right now. We know. But I can see their point. You can see very much when Mr. Hanley's watching, and he's, well, how do you know this works? It just works. I just know it is. He's like, it just works. And he was very afraid, as all Matt Bolton wants it. These things can explode, You know that? So it goes back and forth and back and forth. It's this huge, he could own the world's biggest steam engine company. They were fascinated because he was on the right idea. And it's as simple as this. When Bolton was so frustrated, and Rumsey, they're right off the revolution. There's still a lot of bad attitude, bad blood between them. And Rumsey is hinting darkly that he's going to go up to Ireland and make a steam vessel for the canals up there, and patent law in England didn't even fly there. He's hinting darkly that he's going to go somewhere else with the idea. And finally, Bolton, this is exactly what he said. I'll kind of paraphrase though. He said, Mr. Rumsey, our Mr. Watt has calculated mathematically exactly how much heat, temperature-wise, that will create this much steam. We have figured it out exactly. And you haven't. We know. And what they also didn't say is, Oh, well, that's the code, but we do our calculations and things don't go wrong. And Rumsey just did not get that. And finally, Bolton says to him, Mr. Rumsey, from the very start, we thought we really had a great potential here. But for now, it seems you counter substance with shadows. And you, my friend, have mistaken the road for the goal. And they terminate. Not good because there are debtors' prisons. And Rumsey is in debt. And so,
He's still in England?
yes, this is all boiling up. But you know what? They're right. You've never gone through the process, Mr. Rumsey, of mass producing trial and error, fix it again, trial and error. You don't understand that. We calculate, we lived it, we lived it. He said, if you, Mr. Vaughan, had understood how many steam engines we made, hundreds, you would understand what the problem is. So what does James Rumsey do? He doesn't have as much political power because Franklin has died. And he was the one putting the Philosophical Society behind. He could come home, and he tries one more time. He goes to work. Remember, he's going to war against the most powerful industrialist in London. You know, again, you gotta love the guy, but he goes to work to make another one called the Columbia Maid. And he pounds away at it, works on it. And it's admirable. There's no way. Back then, there was no investors. Fulton, let's get this really clear. And 20 years later, whatever, Robert Fulton did make a steamboat. Robert Fulton did know Rumsey in London. Why reason we know that? He was an apprentice in the art studio of Mr. I think it's Benjamin West. And Rumsey sat for a portrait there. And there's letters saying they got to know each other. Fulton was an artist, not an engineer. You'll never find drawings of Fulton. He was a packager. And when he did a steamboat, not a single thing on it is taken from Rumsey's steamboat. Because he feared the explosions too. So he used a Bolton and Watt vintage type engine. 20 years later, when there was no, they were allowed into this country. So all of that. He's working on the Columbia Maid. I think it looks an awful lot like sabotage to me. When he's working, and this guy who's in the Royal Navy, who's in charge of the boat, marches on board, says, I'm in charge, go away, and he runs the whole boat aground. Bolton and Watt were very powerful. And kind of very quixotic for Rumsey trying to find something here. Okay, we're almost done. He is the smart people, the educated people really revere him. He's already gone to Paris, March 1789. Spends a day with Thomas Jefferson. Two geeks really had a ball. And the next day, if you have any question about who he was, Rumsey, I have a copy of the letter on the internet. Joseph Willard, president of Harvard, from James Thomas Jefferson, goes on and on about this and that and this and that. And he said, but on the whole, Rumsey is the greatest, most original, mechanical genius I have ever seen. But he couldn't get it finished. That's where we are. He gives an address trying to scrum up some funds, some backing. He's writing some notes, talk about pressure. And suddenly grabs his head. He's conscious but kind of paralyzed. And, the last thing he says is, I must die. The doctor said, we all know it is an overheated brain, of course. So he would never foresaw all of this. But one of the great ironies is because he wasn't there, obsessively holding on to all his patents. And Joseph Barnes from Shepherdstown, by the way, Rumsey's cabin was located, if you're on 480, if you're on Duke Street and you're going into the Catholic Church, he had a little cabin where that house is just on the south side of that entrance. So the irony is Joseph Barnes comes here and is like, I want to have a meeting with you, Mr. Bolton, and explain kind of what you know about this. Bolton goes, yeah, right, go punt. They're all just gonna grab all those patents, like the next thing they do is take a carriage from the patent office and not zero. Rumsey's ideas were liberated because he died and there was no clear air. And they got out into the world. Fulton worked for who knows, about 20 years. The Fulton boat up and down the Hudson, it was a temporary thing. Because as soon as you could make an ocean-going vessel with what they call super steels that weren't gonna burst under enormous pressure, it was all the tube boiler. Rumsey wins in the end, and I had some even into the mid-1950s, power plants were using steam turbine technology based on Rumsey. Okay, believe it or not, that's most of it right there. We're all done. Any questions?
Well, comment on that, talking with Dan Tokar about Rumsey's design, the other thing that was kind of interesting is that Fulton's propulsion was mechanical. I guess paddle wheel, I think it was before.
Yeah, he used paddle wheels and sails.
Paddle wheels, right? But Rumsey's was direct, was a jet,
It was the first jet ski.
It was the first jet, yeah, and that didn't become a thing in transportation until the jet engine, like in the 30s or something like that.
See,
so it's that idea in itself, like using hot gas to propel something, was like way ahead of its time.
He was way ahead of his time, and now that you said it, how many of you know what when you have what's the pump? You have this thing with a little. Oh, come on.
Archimedes.
Yes, Archimedes screw. Rumsey looks at that. Notice it looks like a propeller, doesn't it, right? He looked at that and he said, what if I use that shape to create a force in air? He even did that. Holy cow. But you can't say he invented the airplane. What's an airplane? But his mind was, and the reason that the shallow draft steamboats was he simply put the boiler and everything on the same floor of the boat as the other things. That's how he made it shallow. Now, the guys here did a fantastic job, and Nick Blanton has a site called jamesrumsey.org. Man, we're so lucky to have people like Nick, people who actually worked on the boat. Yes. Anyway, that's it. That's it. Thank you. Yes.
Is that still in that little garage back behind the antler?
Yeah.
The boat?
That's a half-scale replica of the boat. And Jay and everybody worked on that for years and years. And that's why Dan and Dan, they made all the parts. Dan and Nick, they all made the parts. And that's how Nick got to be so knowledgeable. That's the kind of thing that happens in Shepherdstown. There was no salaries. 20 years. We run on passion around here. Now you know something.
Is it both functional?
They tried it, yeah, it did, but they scaled it down, I think, by 50%. But you could not scale down the tube boiler by that much. And it had to be much bigger to just.
They didn't take it out on the water in the 80s?
Yeah, it was really funny. 2,000 people cheering madly, just kind of. We still love it. Yeah. But you see, one last thing, Nick is so insightful. He explained that the video which I have, all of Nick's explaining of it. But Nick said the propulsion idea, you create forward motion through steam and you go forward. But he said, what about turbulence. You know, because the turbulence will knock you this way and that way. He said, jet propulsion, like a jet ski, you have to just be aligned with the currents and go straight, a certain straight path. And you couldn't control all these little things that would take away its efficiency. Boy, faked out that knowledge, didn't
It'd be cool to do a field trip there. I haven't seen that. And when I was a kid, it used to be open here and there. They used to open it up as like a little museum.
It's still part of the museum.
Yeah.
Yeah, so when do they open that up? Is there an opportunity to see that?
Weekends.
No?
It's very well done.
You just know, you know? All right, we got a man. That's awesome.
Oh, really?
Field trip.
Only 11.
That's awesome.
You got half an hour.
Okay, listen. Anybody bring a guitar? I can talk about a lot of things, but you've heard a lot already. Let's say you're gonna ask me any question whatsoever.
Was there any Revolutionary War fighting in this region? You never made it this far?
No, and I'll tell you, I'll just say this. Let's talk about George Washington a little bit. I read that wonderful book by Chernow. And Chernow had a great insight. He said, when you get off, he had 30,000 documents or 40,000 documents in the previous single volume on George Washington in 15. He was able to organize it. That's the key thing. But as a writer, I really appreciate this. He said, I broke it up into about 69 stories. It became chapters, and that's how you can manage a lot of knowledge. There's one little place where you can see George is kind of bending it a little bit. And not bad either, but it's this. He was really something else. And, okay. I knew John Augustine Washington. He was the family historian. He died, he was like 97. And we worked together for 20 years. There's like a 7-volume thing called The Washingtons that are published based on John. But what he said of George Washington, he said he wanted to be a Greek idol. Nothing motivated him more than being a Greek ideal. It's not fame, power, or money, as you know. Frederick the Great gave him the sword from the oldest general to the greatest, because the whole world just fell apart. Couldn't believe that after he won the revolution, he just went back home. No one ever did that. He's always trying to go home. I want to go home. No, I want to go. Oh, that's what you love about me, to drag him. So that's one big thing. But that's what I mean. It's not money, fame, or power. Oh yeah, he liked the money. He liked the estate. Really good businessman. And no, not a nice even thought about the Shawnee. It's really hard to communicate to you how the cruelties that the Shawnee did to people. Some kind of thing where the book is called Sharp. Mr. Sharp, True Volumes, The History of Western Maryland. And the Braves would have a prisoner, a guy named Crawford in Washington. I think it was Valentine Crawford. And they'd smoke their pipes to see how much torture that I could bear. Show his manhood. That was their thing. Hey, good job, I'll give him an 8, like that. Please, all I have to say is there's a hole filled with hot coals, and they stick a guy in. Why would you do that? Well, we just want to see how 10 points, how brave he can be. Oh, no wonder Washington hated them, and they hated him and all that. But that's one place you want to go in. So, and then the second thing, which is I skipped around on this, during the Revolution, his incredible contribution was keeping the army in the field against all odds. He was completely convinced that the British were going to come back in New York. He thought the whole thing was going to be in New York. He's betting all his chips on New York being where it was. And he's rushing about, God bless the French, man, they say this. Valley Forge is what got them involved. And bless Lafayette, what a great guy. So anyway, Rochambeau, the French were down here cornering Cornwallis. And George had to make tracks as fast as he possibly could to get down there and be a part of the accolades. That's just one little, fuss he did. Had a temper, after Valley Forge, all of a sudden desperately wanted to fight again. They got their strength back. It's the Battle of Monmouth. And we have Horatio Gates, Adam Stephen, and General Charles Lee, all three generals who were British trained, who just thought George was just an upstart. And they all were grossly incompetent, but they thought he was the upstart. He was incompetent. Long and short is, Washington knows his men are so aching for a fight after that horrible winter. And he just knows they're gonna clobber the British, and all of a sudden they're running back in a panic. They're all running, fleeing the battle, and here comes General Charles Lee, like he really thought he did a good thing. And Washington said, "Why? What?" And Lee said, "I told them to retreat." And eyewitness, you'll love this. I think you will. He said, "Profanity fell from George's lips like leaves." I mean, how many ways can I kick this guy? And he was kicked out. There's a famous story where Gates, Stephen, and Lee, who all lived around here, their homes are still here. The old joke is they're all toasting one another. You were kicked out because you fled when you were supposed to charge. You were kicked out because you charged when you were supposed to flee. And you did nothing. Cheers. So a little bit more on George. Yes.
You contrasted Washington and Jefferson, and you called Washington a stoic. And that piqued my interest because Jefferson actually called himself an Epicurean in his letters. But Jefferson meant that not in a moral or lifestyle sense, but in a religious, specifically religious philosophical sense. And it was as a deist.
Right, like
and so could you say more about, Jefferson left us lots of writing and Washington didn't, but could you say something about Washington's education and his orientation?
If you really look
About
at
stoicism.
this is fascinating. Washington's always a little sensitive about not being schooled, but because of life experience, he had perfect judgment of people. God, he just never missed. And he let those three guys, he knew they were, Horatio Gates tried to wage a coup against him, and he just quietly got the right one. Okay, he had great judgment, but let's never forget that he always had his surrogate sons, who was it? It might have been Lafayette or Hamilton were writing a lot of his correspondence for him. That's why they're so neat with all these guys. But he knew how to pick Madison, Lafayette, and Hamilton. He sure knew what a smart guy is. So, not educated, but he had such incredibly good sense. And one of the most fascinating things is very pertinent now. I'm trying to get the words right. He said, our people are very slow in responding to a crisis. But in the end, they are right. That reminds me so much of Watergate. Because everybody was like, nah. The moment they got that one flaming, document about Nixon, everybody switched. But he had wisdom like that. And also, I don't want to, we have to do Jefferson. What's fun is, I talk trash too. I tell you the stuff, the papers don't put it. You can bet on, you can find this anywhere you want if you want to Google it. Martha Custis said, the two worst day of my life were when my husband died, when Thomas Jefferson came to call. And I think the reason is, look real closely at Jefferson. He was a serious radical in the early days. Really. I mean, he meant everything he said. And he was key in the amazing separation of church and state battle. to watch them, he and Madison maneuver, and they were inspired by the dissenters who were getting beaten up and thrown into jail. It was so much into a movie about it. But then, look, I don't know how to put it, but Jefferson sort of kind of went to sea morally in his later life. Why do I say that? I've seen it. He had an overseer named Yancey. And he's actually sending a message to him saying, look, the women, don't work them hard. Just make them have babies. He didn't say that pretty much what he wants them to do is and the most dreadful thing is he actually calculates how much each one is worth. So he went to sea really badly. And of course, he's in Paris. I think that's where he wanted to live the rest of his life. But no, look, if you know about grief and loss, Sally Hemings looked a lot like his wife. And that whole surrogate thing. And of course, when he was in Paris, nobody cared. You think it's almost like his heart was more Parisian, And another thing, if you see the movie, if you see the play Hamilton, I just reacted immediately to this. Washington knew what violence and war was very well. Jefferson was never there. Jefferson was in Paris, where he was a governor. He was never seeing the bad stuff. He was not even at the Constitutional Convention. He was never at the key places. And so there's a line which I'm sure is accurate. He's saying, we got to have blood in the streets in France. And you can just see Washington, doesn't get it. But they're still, what a hell of a line. What a bunch. He's having all this wine in a great library. And finally his accountants, with a little fear, tell him that if he's not careful, he's going to lose Monticello. And he just went white. That's Thomas Jefferson. I'm just being descriptive. Okay, we can call it a day. Next week, oh no, I didn't see you all jump up with me. Next week, we're going to see, I'm thinking of the future. We're not going to show any of the things that you know about Shepherdstown and the Civil War. Okay? And Deb, do me a favor. I'm going to show you a video which will run most of the time. And Deb was present when we did this. We had a thing called Thy Will Be Done, night 1, night 2, night 3, about 5 Shepherdstown families and other families. And we follow them from the 50s to late life through the Civil War. You like night 2, right?
I do.
Could you tell people a little bit of why it meant something to you? Because that's what we're going to see next week.
So all 3 of the videos, they're excellent. They're about 90 minutes apiece. The first one sort of leads into these families right before the Civil War. The second one is specifically about Shepherdstown and the experience of these families and all the rest of the families in this area for that matter, before, during, and after the Battle of Antietam, which of course was right across the river. So it's beautifully done. It's these people, writing in their diary, sending letters to people and explaining exactly what it was like to be here. And it's extremely moving. It's extremely moving. You may want to bring some tissues with you. It is unbelievable what the people in this area experience. I mean, just imagine being here. Sharpsburg is what, 6 miles away or less? And hearing the battle over there? It's unbelievable. And their descriptions are just spot on. It's fabulous.
Then there's more that I know Jerry doesn't know about.
There is. So that's the bulk of it. But right at the end of the second episode, there's this whole little description of after the battle and after things had sort of calmed down for not very long, I think maybe 2 weeks or so, this magnificent party that lasted quite a
a
while
month.
at the Bower.
The most legendary
House.
home in Jefferson County
Jefferson
by a
County.
mile.
Yes, exactly. And it's just quite the dichotomy between what happened 2 weeks earlier, before, during, and after the Battle of Antietam, and what goes on for a month at the Bower 2 weeks later. It's just very
Party
interesting.
boys, right?
Yeah, it is, it was a huge, big party, but it's just such a contrast between the two, to think that they could go from this to this.
And I
It's
just
just
amazing, this is like spoiler alert, the tone you have all these different glimpses of human experience.
Oh, yeah, it's
And
really.
and Natalie goes there and she, you know, Walker meets her uncles and all that. And then at the spoilers, there's a very huge date, very buxom date coming down the stairs with her on her arm and just, oh my God, who is this? Oh my God. Oh, my son. Until they start dancing and they see the boots.
Don't spoil it, don't spoil it.
I spoiled it already.
It's very good.
But listen, the whole thing is endlessly like the frat boys, you know?
Yeah, they were, anyway, it's very moving. It'll really give you a sense of what it was like to be in this area during the war. It was unbelievable.
Yeah, and I just-
Destruction and the loss of lives and fortunes and, you know, it was unbelievable.
Yeah, thank you. This gives me a critical window, and then we're completely done. Thank you for not tearing out. There's one thing I haven't said before, which is really, really interesting. Over and over again, I get to see more evidence of it. The Bower, so you have a feeling of Shepherdstown. Yes, there's, some people have slaves. I saw the numbers at 20 or something like that, the highest. But you see tons of no slaves or one or two, and you have a lot of Germans who don't believe in it, have a lot of kids instead. If you're enslaved and you're black, it's easy to just escape. And I read how the Shawnee carried away the people who were enslaved. They never harmed them. So there's all this dynamic. Now, what I'm getting at is, if you think there's a difference between Shepherdstown and Charlestown, is ancient and real. High water loyalists settled the southern part of the county. You're not going to see anybody in 1810 with more than 25 slaves in the whole northern part of the county. The Washingtons, my God, 50, 60, 20, 40, every one of them. The Bower had 69. And what people don't know, see, this is the part that's not in the video. They had a relative from Boston who was John Pendleton Kennedy, who was Poe's patron, a good guy. And he wrote a whole novel based on the Bower called Swallow. And that book, in 1830, started the whole tradition of the plantation literary tradition that led to Gone with the Wind. But it was not quite so over the top. That's how important the Bower is. And after digging and digging and digging, Adam Stevens, this was his first Adam Stevens, Adam called Stevens Adam's Bower. He dies, he has children, and the long and short of it is, 2 generations down, all his 5,000 acres are divided amongst 5 brothers and sisters. And only one wanted to be a farmer. So what happens? This is what you don't hear. In the space of 20 years, they had 4 slave auctions of 80 each. And all it was that family member didn't want to do it. But you would see all the working, and the collective positivism was very much an African thing, collective singing and dancing. And when you work everything, so that gave them this impression. They would gather at night in the quarter and make food all night and have children and all sorts of stuff. All the traveling chroniclers never saw that, and they never saw, let me working. It was after the harvest when the sales happened. So these travelers never saw that. So yeah, so anyway, a whole different attitude. It's sort of a industrial thing. And what do you do when another family want to do it? Except Adam, Steve, and Dandridge. But that is, what I'm saying is this. It's all about them saying that obviously absolutely 100% finished. John Pendleton Kennedy, who I really admire, he said, I went to see Adam Stephen. He sadly still has tasted the insane root. That's what he calls it, supporting slavery. He calls it the insane root. He says he's impoverished and he's still eating the insane root. He still believes in slavery. And but this is what I'm getting at. Doug, I'm closing on this. Doug Perks, probably one of the wisest people on history here, who grew up here, he said the most profound thing to me. He said, after the Civil War, Shepherdstown looked at the future with the college, always new infusions of people. Charlestown looked to the past, trying to make a story that echoes the power, it echoes their homes, and for God's sake, I mean, West Virginians. I mean, this county did not want to secede. Did you know that? You got it coming 3 different ways. There was a vote. The last thing, there's a secession convention. We picked 2 sets of delegates. The ones that did not want to secede were overwhelming. So we didn't even want to secede. And then we made West Virginia. And then they're shamed for what they did with slavery. There's a whole bunch of hang-up-ness over there, and God bless their heart, but now you're gonna understand it's different here. Thank you very, very much. We're done.